Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are entering deep down into the world of literary magazines and how to submit to them. So I see a lot of people asking questions online, not to me personally, but I see people talking about how do I submit to literary magazines? Or if it's not for them, it's for someone else. For example, oh, I know someone who's a really great writer and I think they need to get their stuff published, but neither of us know where to start. And I'm here to say today that I am happy to give you some tips and words of advice regarding how to do that. And just a disclaimer, I've been published by 2 literary magazines, and that's over the course of 3 years. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if that's an impressive number to you or just not at all, but I'm just going to speak from my personal experience based on what I know and what I've seen, the things that worked for me, and hopefully some of you will find this useful. So the first step to submitting to literary magazines is to have a collection of work ready. So whether this is poetry or short stories, and I'm going to use the example of poetry for, the first part of this discussion, because most of the time they will ask you for 3 to 5 poems. And what often happens is you write a really amazing poem and you're like, yes, this needs to be published. Whether you have a magazine in mind or you don't, you just think that this is your best piece, but you don't really have enough to submit with it. And I say treat it as a collection, not because I need you or you need to write a whole collection of poetry to submit anywhere, but it needs to be cohesive and consistent, and it needs to give the editor a sense of your style, the themes that you like to write about. And most of the time these literary magazines accept submissions based on themes, so whether it's like seasonal, or sometimes they do have like open submissions as well, but it's always best to put the type of work forward that represents you the best. It's actually a good thing to mix in some of your older material with some of your newer ones. So for example, I had a couple of poems that I wrote years ago, like 3-4 years ago, but I'm still submitting them in literary magazines today because I've just edited them along the years and I think they're so much better than what they were before. And I've also submitted like different versions of the same poem. Like I submitted it 2 years ago and I just thought it was horrible after that, and then I changed a bunch of things around and then I submitted it again. And some of these poems may never get published, so just don't get your hopes up, but it's nice to have that for the reader, for the editor to know what your style is and where you're at. And it's good to mix some of your more polished work with some of your newer / experimental works, something that maybe you just wrote like a day ago or a week ago and you kind of threw together and it's just this bright idea in your mind and you want to get it out there. You want someone to read it. And sure, it might not be perfect, but it's still worth putting in that collection if it fits the theme and if you think that it's representative of who you are today as a writer. So once you have your collection ready, you might think that it's time to submit, but I say hold your horses because there is always another round of editing to be done. Now, whether that editing is going to be done by you or by someone else who you know, maybe you can pass it on to your friends if you are in a writing group online. There are so many writer communities out there these days, especially on social media, like on Twitter. There are lots of Facebook groups, NaNoWriMo, it's a novel writing camp, but you can still have a different type of work. I think in April is when they do Camp NaNoWriMo, and you can do like non-novel works, so like short stories, flash fiction, poetry, and that's totally up to you. So it's always good to have someone look at your poems and tell you which ones they think are the strongest. And so maybe you want to change things around in your submission, you want to take something out, you want to put something else in. I think that outside opinion is always good. I usually go to writing workshops, and I've just been really lucky to have a community of friends who also happen to be writers, so I can actually talk to them about these things. But if you are really stuck and you don't know anyone or how to find people like that, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll definitely try to help you out. I mean, I'd be happy to look at your poems if you want me to, or I can direct you elsewhere. Now it's finally time to submit. What do you do? How do you find a magazine that is going to accept your poetry? The answer is there is no perfect magazine. The perfect magazine is the one who will eventually accept your work. But you gotta cast your net wide here. And the competition is usually pretty high. I mean, I don't know how many submissions they get, but what I do know is that they have a finite number of work that they can accept. So for you to make the most of your submission, you gotta submit to this is my number. The number that has worked for me in the past is 20 to 40 per submission. You need to dedicate like a whole day or a couple days to just submit your work and write a cover letter, write a good cover letter that is short and sweet, that just talks about who you are, what your writing background is, the poems you're submitting, and then tell them if it's a simultaneous submission, which it will be if you're submitting to 20 to 40 places, just so they know that whenever you get accepted somewhere, you're gonna have to email them and tell them that, hey, please take my work out of the running for this issue because it's going to be published somewhere else. A good tool that I use is Submittable, which is this website where you actually can see a bunch of listings by literary magazines that have open calls for submissions at the moment. And you can just scroll through endless numbers of magazines and places to submit. You can bookmark them. And then my favorite part of this website, and I'm not sponsored by them, by the way, there's a satisfying part where you can see all your submissions, and then they get marked if it's been received, as in like the file has been opened by them, and then you also get to see whether it's been rejected or accepted. And I usually get like stacks of rejections, and it's nice to actually forget about your work once you submit it, which is why this is my third tip, or is this number 4? I can't remember. My final tip is submit periodically. Usually literary magazines open their submissions in seasonal periods, so they have like a winter submission or a spring submission and a summer submission. And so you're gonna have really long lulls of silence in between these when they're reading things, or when they're working on publishing their current upcoming issue. So I try to submit like 2 or 3 times a year. I'm sure I can do more if I'm really inclined to, but it is a lot of work. But the second best thing to do after you submit, apart from nothing, is to write more. So when the next submission window comes up, you're gonna have a whole new body of work that you're excited about. You're so excited to submit and work on these newer poems and these newer stories or flash fiction that you've already forgotten about the batch that you sent in like 3 or 4 months ago, and then you're working on submitting this new batch, and then you might start hearing back from the previous submission. They may be good news, bad news, but it's always good to hear back and know that someone out there has read your work, and that always helps, you know? I think it does make a difference. I know sometimes you might be under the impression that, oh, they said, please submit to us again in the future. We really loved your work, but we can't fit it in this issue. You might think that that's just like a ruse, but you know, I guarantee you there is some like psychological thing behind that, because if they've seen your name before and they recognize some of your work, there is a higher chance of them wanting to accept you the second, third, fourth time around, because they're like, hey, this person, if you've been improving, they'd be like, hey, this person's writing has gotten better, you know, this person must be getting really active in the literary community, so it's worth a try. And of course, my final tip would be to never give up. Honestly, this is the cheesiest thing I can come up with, but just don't give up. Know that there are so many places out there looking for submissions, and maybe it's just a case of finding smaller presses to submit to. I mean, there's no shame in having your poem or short story featured in like a smaller magazine website, or even just like a little zine. You know, you don't always have to shoot for the big famous magazines or the collections, because they will be 100% more competitive. But any chance to get your work out there is a good one, as long as you find a place that feels like it can represent you, and if you're happy for your work to be featured with this publication, then it can only benefit you in the future because it gives you writing credentials, it gives you more experience, it gets your name out there, and yeah, every time you submit, you're going to be better. So that is the, my little words of advice, and some resources I will put in the description box below for websites where you can find a list of magazines to submit to apart from Submittable, because I know one flaw of Submittable is that they organize their submission windows, submission lists by like the window of time that they're closing in, which may not be what you're looking for, because then you just get like a bunch of random magazines that might not have anything in common, but there are curated lists online. Most of the time you can just Google them, like literary magazines to submit to for science fiction or for flash fiction or for like, I don't know, romance. A good resource is pw.org, the website. They have a really comprehensive list of literary magazines, so do check that out, but I will put a full link of places in the description box below. But honestly, if you still are struggling, or you just have more questions, or I somehow didn't explain things very well, feel free to leave a comment below, or you can find me on Twitter, which people do tend to message me at. Yeah, just message me with your question, and I'll try to help you as best as I can. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of Literary Education with Jess. This is a new name that I came up with for a brand new series that I just decided is going to be a series. Hope you guys are having a fantastic week, and I'll see you guys soon with a new video. Goodbye!